Hi there. I'm going to start by giving my conclusion right up front, like an academic article. This is the focal point of this whole video, one sentence conclusion. That fundamentally, Benioff and Weiss are not to blame for Netflix's big Three Body Problem adaptation falling short of expectations, both critical and projected viewership numbers. Netflix itself is at fault because it was an inherently bad idea to try to mash a hard science fiction novel into the format of a mainstream drama series and expect it to be a mega hit, regardless of what writers they hired. It does tie into their mistakes with Benioff and Weiss because it's part of the wider pattern of the studios picking things based on shiny name recognition, shiny objects, and believing they could do no wrong. It might be a surprise for me to say that no, it's not Benioff and Weiss's fault, but it's part of a broken system. That isn't just that Benioff and Weiss are these boogeymen who came from nowhere. It's the system was so corrupt in the 2010s that it allowed men like that to thrive. The comparison I use is HBO's Chernobyl miniseries, which ironically came out right after Game of Thrones ended, though it was a co-production with Europe, because it really summarized the whole point of that was it's not that the head of the power plant was corrupt, because despite everything he did, there should have been safeguards in place to make sure this didn't happen. Blame the people who hired him, or most of all, that the emergency shutdown should have worked. He had no idea it wouldn't, and it was part of an inherent design flaw that they didn't tell him about, because they were the higher-ups had blind faith in their own choices, that why worry about something that isn't going to happen? That just how much they believe in themselves and we're incapable of failure is doing everyone. So, just as with Benioff and Weiss failing upwards because, well, how could they fail, and taking advantage of the sunk cost fallacy, Netflix fundamentally chose something which shouldn't be filmed. It's not just like Game of Thrones was unfilmable as an excuse people use when something is dense. Game of Thrones is still a fantasy drama, or a sci-fi drama like Dune is soft sci-fi, characterization and social commentary. Hard sci-fi is stuff more interested in the actual science and technology rather than characters or even narrative. Stuff in the style of Arthur C. Clarke, 2001 A Space Odyssey trilogy, or Rendezvous with Rama, for example. It's more akin to that than what would be a mainstream drama show. And they picked it anyway. So fundamentally, the fault lies with whoever thought we're going to turn this hard sci-fi novel into the next Star Wars and spend so much money on a big-budget adaptation that it could only succeed if it was as popular as the type of mainstream show it fundamentally isn't. This doesn't even start with Netflix. Going back up the chain of causation, I think this started with Yuzu Group, the Chinese rights holder who bought it from the author. That reading through the articles, on a scale of years, they bought this up and said, we're going to sell it internationally, we're going to turn it into a franchise on the scale of Star Wars with TV shows, movies, they want to make video games, a lot of video games based on it. And even though it's a popular book, it's not that kind of narrative. Then Yuzu shopped it around, and originally it was going to be a big flagship show at Amazon, helmed by Rian Johnson as showrunner. But showing you how delusional Yuzu was getting, and they said, no, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. At the last minute, they increased their asking price so high, and they said, because it's going to be a mega hit. They increased it so high that Amazon passed on it. Let that sink in. Amazon thought they were asking for too much money. Not just that Amazon has deep pockets, but also if the truth of this ever comes out, my hope is there's some executive at Amazon who can come forward and say, I passed on this for the specific criticism of this, that this is not going to be as popular as you think it's going to be. This is a hard sci-fi novel. You're asking for Star Wars level numbers that this will not get. So Amazon passed on it. They shopped it around. Eventually Netflix, whose attitude is, hey, you're greenlit, let's throw money at everything, back in 2019 at least. Netflix was willing to pay through the nose to get it. And then it's that whole catch-22 sunk cost fallacy thing. If we already spent a lot of money on it, therefore we can't cancel it. Sunk cost fallacy, which again ties to Benioff and Weiss, who have thrived on that. That You already spent money on us, therefore you have to give us a job. That's how they tricked HBO after the failed Game of Thrones pilot. Their answer was simply, yeah, we didn't know what we were doing, but you already spent $10 million on the pilot. It's the most expensive pilot in history to date. And because they took out foreign pre-sale loans against a pilot. Wow. But they said, you already spent $10 million on this. The only way you're going to get that money back is if you at least greenlight season 1 to earn your at least break even. So, similarly, also in 2019, but unrelated to this at first, Netflix signed a 5-year multi-show development contract with Benioff Weiss for $250 million. No one show could ever make that kind of money back. It's a multi-show deal, like the kind they give to Shonda Rhimes or Ryan Murphy or something. And then for 4 years, for like 2 or 3 years, they didn't suggest anything. Until the point came where Netflix had to assign them Three Body Problem. Not because they were a great fit. Maybe they were convinced they're good storytellers when they're really not. But you can't get blood from a stone. There's a difference between adapting a fantasy novel and adapting a hard sci-fi book without really established characters. They just believe their own lies that, well, they'll be able to elevate it. They're great writers. They can elevate the source material. So it's just this string of everyone believing their own lies and propaganda, not unlike the inherent bureaucracy in the Chernobyl thing where everyone thinks, well, we can do no wrong, where the system is broken, that everyone's believing their own lies. So why did they assign them to such a big show? To get their money's worth out of that they were wasting $250 million on these guys who weren't churning anything else out. Their contract is up at the end, in this year, the end of summer, I think. And what do they have to show for the $250 million you spent on them? So they've overspent so much on this, they couldn't make a small-scale, faithful, hard sci-fi adaptation. They needed to twist and turn it into being a big-budget mainstream show. Because everyone wanted their next Game of Thrones when the streaming boom started. And I think this was bought in 2019. And some of these were like how much they overhyped Lord of the Rings of Power will be the next Game of Thrones, when I didn't think it ever could be. And the actual show they got, I thought, was halfway decent. It's just not the mega hit you thought it would be. Don't set your own bar too high. It was actually pleasant to me because I'm a Tolkien fan. I thought it's presentable. It could get better in another season. I see potential in it. I know fans have to criticize, but they could go somewhere, but not a dumpster fire. Some of these other things were not great, like the Halo thing that Paramount got really wasn't that good. And degrees ranging in between, everyone wanted their own thing. And in some cases, they bought up titles that really didn't fit that format. Case in point, the big comparison, I think, would be to Apple's Foundation series. And that is running into some cost problems. Season 3 might be the final season. It didn't turn into the cultural zeitgeist, everyone talking about it hit they thought it would, but Season 2 was a lot better than Season 1. On Red Team Reviews suggesting I watched the whole thing this winter. It's decent, but the other thing is, even the Foundation novels themselves are more soft sci-fi than they are hard sci-fi. Like, Psychohistory is a fictional science. And it does have interesting characters in it, like their Hober Mallow in Season 2 is basically what I thought Hober Mallow was like, or Bel Rios. There are characters in this who are memorable, and they changed a lot of it, but keeping the core idea of when civilization is collapsing, do you have faith in science and knowledge to survive instead of just reverting to blind faith, and in either in institutions or religion or whatever. It was in the spirit of Asimov, if not the letter of it. And also, David Goyer is a good writer. And repeatedly would say, I couldn't make a line-for-line adaptation. They would have never have made it. So I point to what Goyer did, where he had to change things in what wasn't even really a hard sci-fi series to make it more of the TV mode. Otherwise, it wouldn't have justified the cost they put into it. My argument is that hard sci-fi is so based on abstract ideas that you could have made a shoestring budget adaptation of Foundation with people talking in a boardroom pointing at a map, at a star map. It would have basically been the same. You could have done the novels like that. They wanted to jazz it up, though, it's like, then don't turn it into a flagship show. Treat it as a niche, small-scale, cerebral show, is sort of the point of all of this. Instead, they wanted something to be a new flagship, which was an inherently crazy idea. And then compounded their error by not only do we have blind faith we made the right choice, we have blind faith that Benioff and Weiss are capable of elevating it. When even like Goyer, I think, would have had a harder time with Three Body Problem than he did with Foundation. It just doesn't lend itself to that. That this could never be what Netflix wanted it to be. That I am not dumping on fans of the Three Body Problem novels. I'm saying this, to justify this level of cost, it would need to be a mainstream drama, when hard sci-fi isn't that. Can't Get Blood from a Stone. Why did you even try to make it that kind of big budget show in the first place? Like, imagine if they said we're going to make Arthur C. Clarke's Space Odyssey trilogy or Rendezvous with Rama our Game of Thrones. Well, by that logic, Game of Thrones is a big, expensive flagship drama when this is a cerebral, hard sci-fi. That it is not a similar genre. What are you talking about? Which leads into the chapter break here. I've seen Three Body Problem fans, and I feel bad for them, saying, why don't hard sci-fi stories deserve big-budget adaptations? Pragmatic reality, that first off, you could have told it on a shoestring budget, and a big budget inherently means you need to pay for it with high viewership that will only come from adding in more drama elements. And this is an abstraction. We have the Chinese language 10-cent version. I've been watching it on PBS, literally shoestring budget, scientists talking in rooms, basic, perfunctory, off-the-shelf CGI, and it tells the story really well and is really intriguing. That's the only counter-argument. Well, don't we deserve a big-budget Rendezvous with Rama? If you made Rendezvous with Rama into a 8 to 10 episode TV series and pegged it as this will be the next Stranger Things, everyone would be disappointed because it's actually a cerebral sci-fi novel talking about technology. The characters are paper thin. A good writer would have had to invent characters from scratch. Benioff and Weiss are bad at that. What's the one meme that people keep saying about Benioff and Weiss? Oh, they were good at adapting material until they ran out. No, they voluntarily abandoned the print books 4 and 5. This doesn't begin in season 8 or even season 7. Season 5, when we were all complaining about the Sansa rape and TV Dorn, and when you confront people about that, they just mentally blank space, does not compute because it's too horrifying that, no, this went bad well before they ran out of books. But even then, the stereotype people have landed on that, well, they're good at adapting other works. Or, oh, Three Body Problem be good because it's a finished book series and the other book series wasn't finished. You've admitted that they are bad at creating original characters. And this is a hard sci-fi novel where the characters were so paper thin. It's just the format. I'm not criticizing Aziz and Lou for that. The characters are so paper thin, they would have to invent characters, which by your own admission, they're not good at. The advanced reviews are saying that the invented characters are paper thin archetypes, and not exactly offensive, but not particularly memorable. And they thought, they'll elevate it, they'll turn it into better material. It's adapting hard sci-fi is difficult, and probably should remain at a smaller budget for the people who would watch it, as opposed to, you wanted to turn it into the next Game of Thrones or Stranger Things scale thing, you gave it that level of budget, and then you're going to be surprised when it doesn't get the viewership relative to that. Why didn't you just make a smaller budget one the way Tencent did? Don't blame the audience well, the audience should be watching it. I would love a high-budget Rendezvous with Rama 10-episode series, and thankfully Denis Villeneuve is going to be adapting it as a cerebral movie, but there's things he can do as movies he can't do as TV shows. And even then, he's not hyping that Rendezvous with Rama will be the next Dune. He's saying it'll be the next Rendezvous with Rama, or the next Arrival, maybe. That's a better fit for hard sci-fi, because there are art house films like that, cerebral. It was fundamentally a mismatch that Netflix picked because it was a big name, not because it was something that could fit. And then they put their most, based on it's expensive, therefore it's good, attached Benioff as a name, which only compounded it really needs to be big, not only for Netflix's sake, but for him to rebuild his career with, his triumphant return. When Even a good writer would have struggled with this. So that's a comparison. It really isn't comparable to Foundation, because even that wasn't quite as hard sci-fi as this. It would be easy for us to scapegoat Benioff and Weiss, and the advanced reviews say it's presentable. How much of that is Alexander Wu babysitting them, we don't know. My issue is with the fandom who says, well, why don't we deserve a high-budget hard sci-fi? You could have... Tencent demonstrated you could have done it more cheaper than this. On top of that, Benioff is an idiot when it comes to filming logistics, that he's spending on things you don't even see on camera, like the VR world. We've heard that it was needlessly expensive relative to what they needed to tell the story. Well, why don't we get this photorealistic VR world when Tencent just gave us off-the-shelf video game graphics? Because it has very little meaning to the overall story. It's empty spectacle. And for hard sci-fi fans, it's about the ideas, not empty spectacle. Why would you really fixate on that? A lot of this is sour grapes and sunk cost of, we wanted it to be good. I think that's why so many people ultimately stayed with Game of Thrones through Season 8, then wigged out so hard, is that deep down, they knew there were problems Season 5 onwards, but thought, if I stay with it, the ending will make it worth it. And that they're too ashamed to admit even to themselves that, no, it was bad and we shouldn't have kept defending them, but we already invested so much in this. That it can't be bad, it's too big to fail. And in terms of three-body problem, if you are a three-body problem reader, I don't mean this offensively, but it reminds me of when the Doomsday Battle is happening at the end of the second book, the humans are so overconfident that we deserve to win. We have thought of every scenario, that when they're losing this specific battle, but not the war, but when they realize the aliens have technology we didn't consider, it says that even at the height of that, some of them were in complete denial because they thought we couldn't lose. Even as they see ships blowing up, they say, it can't be that. It has to be something else. We spent 200 years thinking we were going to win this. And they are so comfortable and overconfident that we deserve good things, that when the bad things happen, they can't mentally process it. So, the point of this video I gave up front was, while this might not be this... It isn't one big moment if Benioff Weiss is an idiot, they made these giant changes. You pegged your comeback on a hard sci-fi novel which should never have tried to imitate the mainstream drama format. And they did what they could. And it's not that I think Benioff and Weiss even failed with Three Body Problem. They did fail. Their failure was that they signed a 5-year, $250 million development contract, then sat on their asses and came up with absolutely nothing. Until Netflix had to assign them something. The fault is, don't even blame that, well, we were assigned Three Body by Netflix. You were paid hundreds of millions of dollars to come up with your own ideas, and it turns out you aren't these amazing storytellers that people keep retrenching of, well, they don't have good original ideas, but they're good adapters. Part of adapting is coming up with original things when you need to fill in the gaps sometimes. And even then, did they suggest adapting something else? There's other books they could have said, can we get the rights to this and adapt it? They didn't do that either. Netflix has been making a string of bad decisions lately, with the notable exception of One Piece, don't get me wrong. But for every One Piece, you have a Cowboy Bebop. You have Avatar: The Last Airbender was apparently presentable, but not earth-shattering, and I hope they've renewed it through Season 3, and I hope, for the sake of the actors, who you don't normally see Asian actors getting lead roles that much, it's a whole thing. I applaud them, I like the actors from other projects. Good for them. But this is coming off of a string of points where they thought Avatar would be the next Stranger Things, and it's a modest success, but I don't think it's as over budget as this. That Netflix original programming has been making a string of bad decisions. There's nothing I watch on Netflix anymore. They have been doing very well because they have good infrastructure, that they're really the only streamer that has a good international setup. If there's a hit in Europe or Asia, they can quickly market it here using the algorithm. Other streamers barely have that capability, so they actually are the only one posting revenue. So it's this odd thing. We're going to get in State of the Industry in other videos, that Netflix's original programming is falling flat on its face the past 2 years, with obvious exceptions such as One Piece, even if they can probably absorb these losses. So like I said in my other video, like, one way or another, we're going to be able to gauge how well Three Body Problem did as this hard sci-fi you try to force into the mold of something else. That even if it was a faithful adaptation wouldn't get those viewership levels. It's not that kind of story. July, we're going to have the 1-2 punch of Netflix post its viewership figures for the first half of the year, and the Emmy nominations come out. And only then can we truly assess how well this show did. And it's a question of, will Netflix cut their ties with these guys? Not cancel the show, but change showrunners. Is impossible for me to predict. And I'm making this a day before the premiere, and the advanced reviews said it's not that there's one obvious bad point, it's just kind of boring. And they were assigned this because he's a con man who can, Netflix, hire me, I have all sorts of ideas. Then nothing happened. Netflix has been making very bad choices since they fired Cindy Holland, who is the programming head who made their original content starting in 2013. And with her gone, they've been making a... Look what they did to The Witcher. Look what they did to Shadow and Bone. And all these other stupid things they've been doing. So I don't know what's going to come in the near future, but I think that this will be overshadowed, even in a month's time, by Amazon's Fallout. But thankfully, this post-strike ripple effect the post-strike drought will be over by summer when Star Wars comes back, House of the Dragon will come back, Doctor Who, Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, all these other shows starting like late May, all of TV comes back, particularly June. TV will come back in a big way that we haven't seen in a long time. And this Three Body Problem thing, will people even list this as one of the top 10 shows of the year? Netflix genuinely believed this would be one of the top 10, top 5 shows of the year based on their spending level. And the fact that it was a pleasant but forgettable thing is one of the worst things you can do. So I'm going to keep following this, but thankfully the House of the Dragon trailer is coming tomorrow. By no accident, it seems HBO put it out opposite that. So I'm probably going to review this 8-episode thing, not this weekend, but by the weekend of March 30th, 31st, I'll try to cover this. But I think the advanced reviews are reasonably accurate of who thought adapting a hard sci-fi was a good idea. Second, who thought giving it to Benioff and Weiss would get blood from a stone, when even a qualified writer like David Goyer would have difficulty doing that.